Thank you. Yeah, I guess this microphone hopefully works. Hey everyone, great to be here, and thanks Erica and the BUIDL team for organizing this. You know, the crypto community in Lisbon or in Portugal has been quite big since the first breakpoint in 2021. Very excited to be here and talk a little bit about what we're doing. I want to kind of start taking it back a bit. The topic that I'm talking about today is capital efficiency in DeFi. I didn't want to use restaking, you know, it fell out of fashion a little bit. So yeah, to start there, I kind of wanted to go back and, you know, discuss what sort of collateral we had in crypto since, you know, the early days of DeFi summer or even before. So, you know, in the very start, we basically just had the bare ETH or wrapped ETH. There wasn't even staking yet, right before the merge, before Lido. Bitcoin was basically not even accessible on Ethereum yet and just stuck on the Bitcoin chain, and I guess Tether as the first stablecoin. Then, you know, in times of DeFi summer, what we saw is the tokenization of the staked ETH or the staked ETH products like Lido, predominantly STETH. We saw some of the first Bitcoin wrappers like Wrap Bitcoin, kind of centralized wrapped. USDC, of course, came to the stage. And then I think in the last few years, we saw a lot of innovation in terms of these like tokenized products, tokenized yield products, tokenized assets. Specifically like LRTs when the restaking hype came up, and also the idea of looping, or basically like leveraging through lending markets the yield of the underlying assets, and maybe even tokenizing that as well as LBTC, so like new wrappers for Bitcoin. There's been like a whole trend of BTC-Fi that is still playing out, or still very early in a way. There's not been that much activity yet. And of course, like Ethena as on the stablecoin side as a product, like a tokenized hedge fund that really incorporates like a different source of yield than the treasury yield by doing the delta neutral trade and tokenizing it and making it available in the DeFi ecosystem. Now, you know, as we go into 2026, we are seeing like, especially STETH becoming like a prime collateral in DeFi. We expect like more on Bitcoin, but also another trend that we're seeing, which the guys before me just also talked about, is like, you know, RWAs and other yield-bearing stables like private credit, tokenized, and those assets, if they go into DeFi, right, they become composable, they become like a potential collateral that maybe has a cheaper cost of capital because they are already yield-bearing, right? So just talking a bit about looping, so I think it's an interesting trend that came up in the space where people generate like capital efficiency or generate higher yields by taking their ETH, putting it into Lido, getting the staking yield from there, using the tokenized representation of STETH to borrow against, and then depositing that, getting that ETH and depositing it back into Lido and back into the lending protocol. So you can, depending on the LTV ratios of that specific market, you can kind of create an amount of leverage on your underlying asset and kind of boost the yield, but you are more susceptible to basically be liquidated if the underlying asset kind of has some sort of price divergence, meaning you're actually sort of taking additional risk, of course, and there's people that manage these loops. So I have some data here on, you know, how this looks. There's a good report from Kaiko, for example, on Aave that shows that, you know, basically 75% of the collateral depositors, so the supply side on Aave, they are using like LSTs or LRTs, so especially like EtherFi, EETH, and Lido STETH, and many of them have like a leverage of 1.5 to 3, so meaning they actually borrow ETH and redeposit into Aave to borrow more ETH and stake that again to kind of boost their yield. So I think that's quite interesting. So a lot of the economy on these lending markets is basically this looping. Now, working on Symbiotic, or like a restake protocol, or universal staking as we call it now, there's like basically like a sort of other risk that you're opting into. Like I'm comparing this here as an example. So let's say comparing just having STETH and a 3 times loop position, you're essentially kind of stacking those risks of slashing of the underlying ETH and exposing yourself to the slashing risk like 3 times essentially. So if there is a depack of STETH because of a slashing incident in Lido, then those loopers would be like the first to be liquidated and have to unwind their position or like suffer the losses from that if they were, because they're basically like triply exposed to that slashing risk. Now, if you're restaking your ETH or if you're using like a protocol like Symbiotic, then you essentially enter into other risks. And I will get into a bit how it works in our protocol, how you can choose the risk that you expose your collateral to, but in essence, you sort of delegate to different networks or AVSs or whatever you want to call them, use cases, and essentially stack the risks of those protocols up. So I'll get a bit into there, but this is like a kind of a fundamental maybe way of how we approach this collateral and using and exposing it to different risks and how you can think about that. Okay, yeah, so maybe just like in general how it's Symbiotic, how the protocol works. We have designed a very modular system that allows to essentially take in any collateral asset, so it can be the prime collateral, STETH or Bitcoin, or also yield-bearing stables. And we have this vault structure, so you can decide the vault lockup length, how much does the collateral need to be locked to be slashable. There can be like custom slashing flows, so you can, as a network that uses this flow, can decide, what are the slashing triggers, what happens in the case of slashing, so you can decide that funds can be redistributed to other users. So we're seeing some insurance use cases where the collateral, maybe instead of it just being burned upon slashing, it's kind of redistributed to the victims, to the ones that bought the insurance policies. Or like we have a stablecoin protocol, Cab Labs, that is using it to essentially back the stablecoin. So the users of the stablecoin, they always have like sort of this underwriting in the back of the staked assets. And you can have custom reward logic and also restaking. So restaking in this case is a very misunderstood term. The idea is really that you use the same collateral to expose to multiple risks, is probably the factual description. And then, again, you can have like different use cases for collateral. So what we're seeing now is the use case for restaking that actually generate yield, and where people want to use prime collateral outside of like their own native tokens is really like more underwriting of credit risks, underwriting of smart contract cover. We have a collaboration also with Nexus Mutual that allows like ETH holders or Bitcoin holders to underwrite cover of Nexus Mutual and their underwriting. So you essentially earn additional yield on your ETH or Bitcoin, but you're exposed to the risk of claims being made against the Nexus collective. And then, of course, also the infra use cases. So the original first wave of restaking, I would say, it was more about infra, proof of stake, interoperability, using assets outside of for staking, just like proof of stake, or maybe even like using prime collateral like ETH or Bitcoin instead of native tokens. That also still exists. So I want to give like an example how that can look in practice. So again, there's this wall structure, and you sort of, the system can be designed in a modular way to expose yourself to different risks to different extents. So on the left case, I'm using like a vault that takes in Bitcoin and that essentially doesn't use restaking, so only like 50-50 allocates to, let's say, the risk of Nexus Mutual and 50% to the credit risk in CAP, and has a 2-month lock. And then there's another example where you could have a setup that takes another asset, in this case STETH, and has a longer lockup, but it also actually uses restaking in a sense that the same dollar is actually exposed to the risk of this cross-chain interop protocol. This is just an example, but also to Nexus Mutual and CAP in half a dollar way. So you can have, like, you can already see there can be different structures in how you kind of stack the risks, and it's all like a system where there's an opt-in, like the vault provides their capital, and the network needs to accept this capital for it to use it as underwriting. So this is system we're creating. I think it's quite familiar for people that know how insurance works. This is kind of how we scale the usage of collateral in crypto in general. Like, one of the reasons that DeFi insurance has been like prohibitively expensive is just that, one, like, it's very hard to price some of these risks, like total default, but the other one is also that it's not very capital efficient. Like you essentially have to have dedicated pool of capital for maybe one risk and then another pool for another risk. So in insurance, this is a great graphic that Gemini made for me. Generally, you have like capital restrictions, of course, there's regulation, but you can use the same dollar to insure different risks, and it works because many of the risks are uncorrelated. So it's very unlikely that a data center fire in Tokyo and a hurricane Florida appear at the same time, and you would have to like pay out both of those claims. And because of that, you can kind of underwrite more risk, earn more policy cover claims, more policy premiums, and through that make the insurance protocol work, make the insurance overall cheaper. And this is essentially, I think, what will create like a functioning collateral market in crypto, and what we're seeing emerging slowly in the DeFi space. So I'm just kind of showing like some sort of risks that we have on chain and that are coming more and more on chain these days, like especially with the private credit markets coming on chain. We do have like credit risk now coming on chain, especially also in the intent market. So some of the protocols like Sprinter or others use capital to solve intents cross-chain or on the same chain, and then essentially have this short-term loan. And of course, there could be defaults of the solvers. You can also have credit, like fully off-chain credit that you can underwrite, like the risk of default of a borrower. Then you have slashing risks. So classically, like a guarantee for including a transaction in a block. Now with like some of these pre-confirmations protocols, the block builder can provide guarantees that he will include a certain transaction in a block, and you have some risk that if they commit to including the transaction but don't do it, that they can be slashed. So this is kind of infrastructure risk. There's even like real-world risk that you can underwrite on chain now. So we have projects like Onri is the leader in this regard that actually allows people to use their on-chain capital to underwrite real-world reinsurance on outside of the chains. And that's like an uncorrelated source of yield, obviously. And the final one, our recent collaboration with Nexus Mutual, like the classic kind of smart contract insurance where you're securing underwriting the risk of a hack. Now, you can think about like how correlated are these risks really, and you probably come to the conclusion that some of them are probably not very correlated, so it's very unlikely that some reinsurance event in the real world triggers as well as some on-chain smart contract hack. And again, through that, we can create capital efficiency on the underwriting layer, and through that probably make insurance finally work in DeFi. And yeah, just wanted to also show like kind of how that looks in this vault model where different vaults have different assets and take on different positions on the risk-reward curve. So this is kind of a classic finance graph, I guess, where I'm just representing it as like these vaults that have like different risk profiles. So you can underwrite a lot of risks but still earn low rewards, which makes you like kind of inefficient on the curve, right? But you can also have high risk, high reward, and some sort of balanced approach. So there is differentiation in terms of from the supply side how you expose yourself to this risk and what you do for your LPs, and they will like sort of sort themselves based on their risk appetite. So that's the world we're trying to enable. In practice, currently in the protocol, we have 77 vaults, so like 77 risk curators that accept different assets, that have different delegation strategies, 22 networks that use the Symbiotic primitives to provide economic security to them. A lot of them are like infrastructure, like app chains or Oracle and other things, but more and more we're seeing these risk underwriting networks like Nexus Mutual and also CAP, a stablecoin that's backed by state capital. We have over 20 collateral assets. There's a restaking ratio of 3 right now. So restaking ratio basically describes how much different use cases the same dollar in the entire system underwrites. In this case, we're currently at 3. And like 1.5 million in rewards paid out. So this is just kind of the current stats. We have a Dune dashboard on that as well. That's I think my final slide. So just thanks you for listening and thanks for being here.